Chapter 132. Dustless didn't have any doubts about Obito's plan, because his plan was successful. He successfully released the Kyuubi, and although it was a pity that he didn't kill Minato himself, at least he succeeded in killing the couple because of the Kyuubi. To some extent, Obito's plan was indeed perfect. Although the Kyuubi's plan to destroy Konoha's ninja village was successfully stopped by the fourth Hokage, overall, it was good and feasible. If Dustless Sama joins us, this plan to attack Konoha's ninja village will definitely succeed. White Zetsu has seen Dustless's strength with his own eyes. He can confront Madara head-on, and he's not at a disadvantage. His combat power is absolutely incredible. Compared to Uchiha Obito, he was much stronger. Indeed. Black Zetsu also nodded, but there was a vague fear in his eyes. Even Dustless didn't catch this subtle change. In that case, we will invade Konoha immediately. Obito put on his spiral mask, revealing only his Mangekyo Sharingan, and said murderously. As for Dustless's purpose, Obito was too lazy to ask. Anyway, as Zetsu said, with Dustless's help, the chance of destroying Konoha will only be greater. Unknowingly, the Third Shinobi World War was completely over. Although Konoha also suffered heavy losses, it was much stronger than the other four villages. Especially after the surrender of the rock and the sand, Konoha gained a lot of benefits, and its combat power soared, leaving the cloud behind. The bitter cloud-hidden village could only grit their teeth and swallow their anger, secretly investigating Wuchen's whereabouts. The victory of the Third Shinobi World War established Konoha's position as the overlord. Compared to the other four villages, the whole village was filled with joy and laughter. Sure enough, once people indulge in peace, no matter who they are, they will fall and stop evolving. Minato-sensei, you are the same, Obito, wearing a one-eyed mask, stood on the forest, looking indifferently at the giant village in the distance, and the tone of his voice suddenly changed. Destroy Konoha, from now on. Hearing this, Dustless, who was standing next to Obito, glanced at him, then turned his head and looked at the village in front of him indifferently. However, the most shocking thing was that Dustless just stood in the void calmly and quietly, as if he was standing on some invisible support point. He just floated in the sky calmly like that. This guy's ability is really strange, and the people around him are also very strange. Staring at Wuchen floating in the air, Obito's face changed slightly. The surprise in his three-tomo Sharingan was clear, especially the woman floating in the air beside Wuchen, which made him even more surprised. It was really strange that these two people could float in the sky without the help of external forces. The woman beside Dustless was naturally Otsutsuki Haruo. What a foolish man. Don't worry, your wife will meet you in hell soon. The void where Namikaze Minato was standing before distorted, showing a vortex shape, circle by circle, and a person wearing black clothes and a monocular mask appeared. His voice sounded extremely young, and there was a sense of transcendence in his tone as if he had seen through the essence of the world. This was Uchiha Obito. It's really a secret place. Thanks to you, Zetsu. Looking around the secret and strange place, Obito nodded slightly, and immediately looked at the Nepenthes at his feet and praised softly. Zetsu's intelligence-gathering ability is really not to be underestimated, especially the number of White Zetsu's clones, thousands of them, almost all of the corners of the ninja world. There is little information that can't be gathered. This is a good barrier, but it doesn't have any effect on me. The corner of his mouth rose, and under the mask, Obito showed a contemptuous smile, and immediately walked into the square barrier without fear. Compared to Obito, who was very careful, the other side was huge, and there was a sea of people. It seems that it's almost time to start. Dustless's indifferent eyes swept through the crowd below. Although he saw many people he knew in the past, for Dustless, who has completely sealed his heart, these people have become insignificant. After all, their positions and ideas are all different, and these friends who used to be separated are now all enemies. Ka ka ka. Peng peng peng. In the distance, the huge mountain collapsed due to the tremors, and countless meteorites continued to fall from the sky, and mercilessly hit the ground. Staring at the collapsing mountain, Dustless suddenly raised his right arm, and gently touched the broken stones with his palm, and then his right arm seemed to be full of magic power. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. The lifeless boulders rose from the ground, ignoring the existence of the law of gravity, and soared into the sky, floating in the air as if they were floating. Looking around, the meteorites in the sky were big and small, some were as big as a thumb, and some were as big as a beast, and they flew towards Dustless. This trick is really convenient. Looking up at the endless mountain rubble above his head, Dustless suddenly remembered the scene when he invaded the moon. At that time, Otsutsuki Hagoromo treated him with this jutsu, and buried him alive. What goes around comes around. Today it's your turn to enjoy. Laughing happily, Wuchen's raised hand dropped down, and the gravel mountain in the sky completely ignored gravity fell instantly. The number was dense and the scope was vast. It easily covered the whole village of Konoha. Whoosh. 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 Fortunately, it's a dark night, otherwise, if it's daytime, you can clearly see the scene of thousands of meteorites pouring down like a torrential rain. It's extraordinarily spectacular and dazzling. Of course, there are some ninjas with outstanding abilities in Konoha below, especially the ninjas of the Hyuga clan and the Uchiha clan, who can see particularly clearly. Countless giant meteorites are mercilessly smashing towards them. It turned out to be Danzo. Sandaime looked at Shimura Danzo and nodded calmly. Although this old enemy of his was always against him, his loyalty to Konoha was not to be doubted. Anyone could be sentenced to Konoha's ninja village, but not Shimura Danzo. Minato, you're the fourth Hokage, what are you standing there for? Hurry up and call the Kyuubi's Jinchuriki to kill that damn bastard. Shimura Danzo glared at Minato, and said in a cold tone. If it weren't for Minato, the position of the fourth Hokage would have been his. For Shimura Danzo, who was crazy about being the fourth Hokage, it was hard for him to be nice to Minato. Danzo, it's impossible. Don't think about it, Kushina is on her due date. With a frown, the Sandaime coldly reprimanded Danzo, cursing him in his heart. This old guy was decades old, and he was still trying to harm his own people. How could he bear it? So what? The man in front of us is stronger than we imagined. If we don't call the Kyuubi's Jinchuriki to deal with him, who else can be his opponent? Danzo looked at the Sandaime with a sneer, and said in a righteous tone, not backing down. This was not only an opportunity to get rid of the masked man in the sky, but also to get rid of Uzumaki Kushina. Uzumaki Kushina was now pregnant, and if she was forced to fight against the masked man in the sky, both of them might die of exhaustion. In the end, Shimura Danzo would push the Root clan to be his Jinchuriki, and he would have another weapon in his hand to defeat the enemy. I'm the fourth Hokage, and I will protect the village even if I have to die. The killing intent in his eyes disappeared in a flash, and Minato coldly looked at Shimura Danzo. There was no room for negotiation, and his tone was full of courage. How could he not know what Danzo was thinking? He wanted his wife to deal with the masked man? Don't even think about it. What a joke, can your death exchange for the safety of the entire village? Too naive, Minato. Danzo mocked Minato. Although he was influenced by Minato's courage, he couldn't shake his plan. Enough, Danzo, the enemy is right in front of you. Even if you want to play tricks, you should stop. In the end, he couldn't suppress the anger in his heart. The Sandaime stared at Shimura Danzo angrily. His blood-red eyes were filled with cold light. He was very annoyed. Now that the enemy was at their doorstep, whether Konoha could survive or not was a problem. Chakra was surging in his body, and the Sandaime was obviously showing his determination and position. I hope you don't regret this, Sarutobi. Feeling the Sandaime's killing intent, Shimura Danzo's face was livid. He fiercely looked at the silent Minato, and angrily looked at the masked man in the sky, Dustless. Chapter 135. The third Hokage's strong intervention cooled down the internal strife, and they began to turn their attention to the masked man in the sky, Dustless. What is this guy's purpose? It wasn't just Minato and Sandaime who were puzzled. Even Shimura Danzo was very puzzled. Everything had to be done with a motive. Why would Dustless be so straightforward? Even an idiot wouldn't believe it. Minato's thoughts were running wild, and he was distressed. However, Dustless in the sky didn't care what these people were thinking. He raised his hand, and the earth shook. Kakaka, under the astonished gaze of Konoha's shinobi, countless meteorites once again gathered in the sky, densely packed like ants, covering the entire sky. Sarutobi, what else do you have to say? Immediately release the Kyuubi's Jinchuriki. Seeing this, Shimura Danzo looked at the third Hokage with a pale face. He had an impulse to go crazy, and he couldn't wait to put the third Hokage on the ground and beat him violently. With such a terrifying range, there was no way to deal with it other than releasing the Kyuubi. Yes, this guy wants the Kyuubi. Shimura Danzo's words made Minato's mind flash, and he suddenly remembered the Kyuubi, the strongest bijou. For ordinary people, the Kyuubi is the embodiment of disaster, but for people like Dustless, the Kyuubi is a delicious cake. Minato, are you sure? Hearing that the masked man, Dustless, wanted the Kyuubi, the third Hokage's heart fell to the bottom of the valley. His eyes were gloomy as he looked at the thin figure in the sky, and his muddy old eyes showed a trace of understanding. Minato, go support Kushina, this may be a trick to lure the tiger away from the mountain. The third Hokage roared anxiously, and his body was overflowing with murderous intent. He said coldly, from the beginning, he wanted the Kyuubi. So what? Dustless, who was floating in the sky, smiled indifferently. He wasn't worried about Obito's success in capturing the Kyuubi, because that kid wasn't a good person. He wouldn't be merciful just because Uzumaki Kushina was his master's wife. Today, Obito was more ruthless than anyone. But, I'm the fourth Hokage, shut up, the safety of the Kyuubi is above everything else, and the foundation of the village. Leave this kid to me. Looking at the hesitant Minato, Sandaime Hokage said with dissatisfaction. The worst and best problem of this kid is that he has too much responsibility. And Namikaze Minato wouldn't be of any use here. I understand, Sandaime-sama. Minato was not an indecisive person. After struggling for a while, he rushed in the direction of Kushina. As the Sandaime said, the Kyuubi was the foundation of Konoha's foothold. Without it, Konoha would be a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. Sandaime Hokage. You can't compete with me. The conversation between Sandaime Hokage and Namikaze Minato was naturally heard by Wuchen, and he shook his head helplessly. He has both the Tensigen and Rinnegan, plus the glinting fruit which can ignore most physical attacks in the world. If he lost to an old man like Sandaime Hokage, he should have fallen many years ago. Dustless, with his strong vision, clearly saw Minato leaving, and he was too lazy to stop him. Anyway, Otsutsuki Hagoromo was watching Obito, and if something unexpected happened, he would follow Dustless's orders and directly kill Minato. Sarutobi, are you crazy? Watching Minato leave, Shimura Danzo's mouth twitched fiercely, and his old face turned black as he glared at the third. Minato was the most powerful of the three. Now that he left, it meant that the only people left to face the masked man would be Shimura Danzo and the third, whoosh. Whoosh. Whoosh, a dense meteorite rain slammed down from the sky, thousands of them, overwhelming everyone. Once again, all of them roared down, mercilessly falling towards Konoha's ninjas on the ground. Boom. 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 Although many of the meteorites were destroyed by Konoha's ninjas, the scale of the meteorites was too large, and there was not enough manpower to completely clean them up. Many of Konoha's ninjas were smashed into pieces. The endless smell of blood filled the void, and because it was too strong, it didn't dissipate for a long time. Looking at Konoha, although many ordinary people escaped from the battlefield, there were still many who were mercilessly smashed into pieces. Bastard! Seeing this tragic scene, Shimura Danzo shouted loudly, and his eyes were sunken, and his eyeballs were much larger than usual, as if they were about to burst. It was extremely terrifying. I can only use that jutsu. I hope the two Sama will forgive me. Looking at Konoha's hell on earth, the three RD's face was also extremely ugly. Soon, his sad old face was filled with determination and murderous intent. He stared at Dustless, and the murderous intent in his eyes raged like a tide. Such a deep blood feud must be paid back. The Sandaime Hokage gives off a very gentle feeling, like a kind and benevolent grandpa next door. But before that, there must be a premise, and that is, the other party must not be an enemy. In the face of an enemy, the third will completely take off his mask of kindness, and show his violent side as the Hokage. Is it possible that, hearing this, Shimura Danzo's heart sank? He naturally knew about the so-called jutsu, and it can also be said that the first and second Hokage left behind another precious treasure for Konoha besides the Kyuubi. In this case, we should be able to defeat the masked man. Seeing the third completely take off his mask of kindness at this moment, Shimura Danzo breathed a sigh of relief. His heart that was crushed by the masked man dustless finally regained some confidence. Crack. Crack. Crack, the ground suddenly cracked open, and 2 aged coffins were flipped out of the loose soil. Chapter 136. The smell of decay wafted out from the pitch-black coffins. Unfortunately, the 2 coffins were still as good as new. It was obvious that they had been preserved by some kind of special secret technique. It turned out to be the Edo Tensei. It should be the first Hokage Senju Hashirama. As for the second coffin, it should be his younger brother, the second Hokage Senju Tobarama. Wu Chen's eyes were calm from beginning to end. He lived in Konoha for a few years and knew that Konoha left these corpses for a rainy day in the future. The inventor of the Edo Tensei, Tobarama, hoped to preserve the strength of Konoha with this technique, so that one day in the future, when Konoha encountered a calamity, they could be awakened again to help Konoha escape. A mere dead person actually came out to make a fool of himself. Well, let me see how peerless the god of ninja, Hashirama Senju is. Dustless's mouth under the mask curled into a smile, and then his body began to slowly fall from the sky and landed on the ground a few hundred feet away from the Hokage. What a strong vitality. Dustless's right eye suddenly turned blue, and the scene in the coffin was very clear. He could clearly see the majestic vitality contained in Hashirama's body, even if he was dead. As for Tobarama, he was no different from an ordinary person. Well, it saved me a lot of effort. Dustless's eyes became cold. He originally wanted to go to Hashirama after this sneak attack on Konoha, so that he could take away his Senjutsu chakra, but now it seems that it was unnecessary. He can take away everything from Hashirama. On the other side, Uchiha Obito easily invaded the barrier and killed all the ninjas who were guarding the barrier around him. Hate your miserable life, Uzumaki Kushina. Who told you to marry that stupid man, Minato? All of this is your own fault. Staring at Uzumaki Kushina, Uchiha Obito walked over with light steps. He looked coldly at Uzumaki Kushina's sweat-stained face, and his face was cold. Next to Uzumaki Kushina was a newborn baby in a cradle. You, who are you? Struggling to open her eyes, Kushina looked at Obito, who was wearing a mask, and only one of his eyes was exposed. She asked weakly, at the same time, her sleepy eyes swept around. You actually killed them. Kushina glared at the masked Obito and used all her strength to prop herself up. However, because she had just given birth, she was exhausted and fell down again. It doesn't matter who I am. In any case, the 9 tails in your body will break out of its cage soon. In the distance, Otsutsuki Hagoromo quietly looked at the scene in front of him and couldn't help but shake his head, sighing that Dustless made Obito suffer too much. Letting Rin die in the hands of Minato was too much of a blow to Obito, causing him to be so obsessed with the Minato couple. If it weren't for Dustless's interference, Obito wouldn't have been so crazy. Chapter 137. Wuchen stared at the 2 black coffins with endless decay. Tensigen could clearly see the scene inside the black coffins. He could clearly see that Hashirama's body was extremely well preserved, almost no different from when he was alive. He was like a living dead who had lost his breath and was about to fall asleep. As expected of the legendary god of ninja, Hashirama, you really can't be underestimated. After a while, Dustless calmly retracted his gaze. Although he verbally called Hashirama the god of ninja, anyone could hear how contemptuous and even disdainful his tone was. For the former Dustless, Hashirama was an existence that he could only look up to, but for the current him, Hashirama was just a drop in the ocean, an insignificant passerby in the long river of life. Good boy, you're really bold. Shimura Danzo's mouth twitched fiercely as he looked at Dustless with a gloomy expression. He thought that Dustless didn't know that the person in the coffin was Hashirama, but now it seems that he thought too much. Ha! With the roar of the third Hokage, chakra erupted from his body, and when he looked up, he could clearly see that the figure in the coffin was moving. Two figures stood up like ghosts. It's really a long time since I've had fresh air. This bastard, who did this? The angry voice resounded through the sky, as if an ancient creature had awakened, accompanied by the dark blue chakra's restlessness. The burst of chakra directly shook the ground, and many cracks appeared. The two coffins were impressively turned into ruins, and the person who was angry was the first Hokage, also known as the god of ninja, Hashirama Senju. Big brother, don't use chakra. The second Hokage, who was also Edo Tensei, frowned and scolded. At the same time, he looked at the tragic situation of Konoha from the corner of his eyes, and his brows suddenly became gloomy, and his murderous intent erupted uncontrollably. Konoha village was managed by Hashirama and Tobirama. They even sacrificed their lives for it. Now it was destroyed like hell. How could the two brothers not be angry? There's no need to look, the person who slaughtered Konoha is. Before Dustless could finish his sentence, the silver-white cold light in front of him whistled. The sharp cold light reflected a killing intent that made people unable to open their eyes. It was as if they opened their eyes, they would be blinded by the cold light. As expected of the second Hokage, famous for his speed. Dustless turned his head, revealing half of his face, and praised without hesitation. Nidame's speed was really fast, and the human eye simply couldn't capture his movement. It was as if he used a space ninjutsu to fly over. Penetrated? Looking back at Dustless's back, Tobirama frowned slightly, and Edo Tensei's face was full of doubt. He was sure that his Tachi had passed through Dustless's body. Dustless's body felt as if it had turned illusory in an instant. The Uchiha clan's flame fan? Isn't that Madara's weapon? Where did he get it? Hashirama looked at the flame fan behind Dustless with interest. As an old enemy of Madara, he certainly knew that it was Madara's weapon. This was given to me by Uchiha Madara. Looking at Hashirama, Dustless was quite teasing. Nonsense, Uchiha Madara has been dead for decades. This kid must have stolen it. Shimura Danzo, who had been unhappy with Dustless for a long time, immediately frowned. When Madara and Hashirama fought, he and the third Hokage became their apprentices, so naturally, they knew what happened. Not long after the battle, Hashirama also died. In terms of time, it was impossible for Madara to give the flame fan to Dustless. Brother, this kid's ability seems a bit strange. He seems to be able to turn illusory. His eyes narrowed slightly, staring at Dustless with a spiral mask. Tobirama was surprised. It doesn't matter where Dustless's flame fan came from, as long as they capture him, the truth will naturally come to light. Tobirama carefully looked at Dustless with a mask, and his eyes became cold. Dustless destroyed Konoha, and he must pay with his blood. I know. Hashirama naturally saw the difference in Dustless, but he didn't care too much. There were many kinds of ninjutsu in the world, and there were all kinds of them. The only thing that made Hashirama feel strange was that Dustless seemed to have a special power that resonated with him. Let's test him first. Hashirama, who couldn't find the reason, no longer entangled, he printed with both hands, and the majestic chakra broke out of his body, and the ground with Hashirama as the center began to tremble slightly, and the tremors continued to spread wildly. Wood release, world of trees. Boom! The ground suddenly cracked, and countless thick trees emerged from the depths of the ground. The number was dense and endless, and the surrounding environment instantly turned into an endless green jungle. Amazing range. Looking at the green jungle that seemed to swallow the whole world, Dustless nodded slightly, and his eyes once again fell on Hashirama, and he restored his eternal calmness. Whoosh! Countless green vines emerged from under his feet, and they rose sharply along Dustless's legs, and soon Dustless was firmly tied. Say, who are you, and what is your purpose? Hashirama's voice stopped abruptly, and he saw Dustless's body suddenly swept a swallowing force, and the vines that were still full of vitality instantly fell to the ground like dead branches. This guy, seeing this, Hashirama's face sank, and he looked at Dustless with a dignified expression. He knew that Dustless swallowed all the chakra in the wood release. Since it is proven that he has the Rinnegan, it seems that ordinary techniques won't work on him. Then, Hashirama printed with both hands, and the vast and majestic chakra floated out of Hashirama's body. This unprecedented chakra was much more terrifying than the Kyubi. Sage method. Looking up, Hashirama closed his eyes slightly, and there were many red marks on both sides of his eyes. His whole body was filled with a huge natural chakra. Bright God Gate. Red logs fell from the sky, and the shadows covered the sky. Looking up, the number was quite large, and the range was not small. It seemed that they wanted to completely crush Dustless. This should be able to subdue him. Looking at Dustless floating in the sky, Tobarama said with uncertainty. To be honest, he didn't believe it himself. The Rinnegan was above the other two dojutsu. If it was so easy to kill it, the reputation of the Rinnegan wouldn't be so bad. How could the legendary Rinnegan, which could create and destroy the world, be so weak? It's worthy of being a technique that can even bind the Jubi. Looking up at the red logs in the sky, Dustless smiled faintly, and then the Rinnegan in his left eye suddenly floated out ripples, and a strong repulsive force was ejected again. Bang bang bang, the cylindrical rosewood that wanted to kill Dustless was suddenly bounced back by this strong repulsive force. Not to mention killing Dustless, it was extremely difficult to even touch him. Attack and defense in one. Tobarama frowned slightly when he saw this. This technique gave him a feeling that it was quite troublesome. Whether it was attack or defense, it was perfect, and there was no loophole at all. It's my turn. Dustless in the sky suddenly disappeared, and only the golden straight light poured down, and went straight toward Hashirama and Tobarama. The thick beam of light emitted a terrifying sharpness that could cut through all things. Anyone who came into contact with it would die. Mokuton, Jutsu. The sky suddenly turned dark, and the wooden shield of the fanged ghost face surrounded Hashirama and Tobarama to defend against the terrifying impact of Dustless. According to Dustless's appearance, the probability of him not using Yin-Yang release was 0. Edo Tensei would definitely be finished after being hit by Yin-Yang release. There was no possibility of recovery, so he had to make a defensive countermeasure. It seems that this guy should be coming for the Kyubi. Tobarama, who was good at using his brain, analyzed and immediately said the answer to Dustless's attack on Konoha. There was nothing in Konoha that could attract Dustless's attention except for the Kyubi. Indeed. Hashirama also nodded in agreement. Although he didn't know what Dustless wanted to do with the Kyubi, there was no doubt that he was coming for the Kyubi. Puchi. The crackling sound of wood cracking resounded, and the golden light illuminated the dark world. Suddenly looking up, it was Dustless who had directly smashed Senja Hashirama's wood-release defense. This guy is really evildoer. The corner of his mouth twitched fiercely, and Tobarama was speechless. This technique once defended against Uchiha Madara. Chapter 141. Looking at the incoming Rasengan without fear, Obito stood in the same place. His body was motionless like a sculpture, letting the giant Rasengan hit his face. It's useless. After saying that, Obito closed his eyes leisurely, turning a deaf ear to the oncoming Minato. The moment he caught Minato's sneak attack, he immediately activated his Sharingan's Kamui ability, turning his body into nothingness. On the other side, the atmosphere was even more solemn and quiet, and the strongest battle was about to begin. It's amazing, I didn't expect the Uchiha family to have a genius like you. Looking at Dustless standing on the head of Kensusanoo, Hashirama sincerely admired him. Although Dustless's face was hidden behind the mask, he could still see that Dustless was definitely not more than 20 years old. But, Hashirama's tone suddenly became low, and he looked at Dustless with uncertainty. He seemed to be thinking of the past, and his thoughts were lost in his memories. After a while, Hashirama recovered, and his killing intent burst out like a tide. A majestic chakra was slowly brewing behind him, and several white-headed Buddhas with giant arms were faintly visible. Even the ultimate body Kinsusanu, dustless, was stunned. It's a pity that you fell into the devil's path at such a young age, Senjutsu, thousands of hands. As Hashirama's voice fell, several white-headed Buddhas with giant arms suddenly formed behind him, and the huge range was much larger than Dustless's Kinsusanu, and it was heading toward Dustless. This. No wonder Uchiha Madara lost to Hashirama. Dustless was also secretly shocked. Looking around, he saw numerous Buddhas with thick arms rushing toward him, and the ground was shaking slightly. The momentum was monstrous. Hashirama stood on the head of the Buddhas and rushed toward Dustless's ultimate body Kinsusanu. I can see that you and Madara are the same kind of people. In order to pursue power, you will do anything, and you will turn a deaf ear to the pain of others. Hashirama's eyes on the head of the Buddha became colder, and his killing intent became more and more thorough. There were signs of condensing into ice. He saw the figure of Uchiha Madara in the past from Wuchen. His mentality was even crazier than Madara's. Wuchen's eyes were stronger than Madara's. Every man for himself, and the devil takes the hindmost. Hearing this, Wuchen sneered at Hashirama. If it wasn't for this guy's Virgin Mary mentality, listening to Madara's advice, maybe Konoha would have unified the world, and there wouldn't be such a large-scale war. It seems that you are really hopeless. Hashirama's expression became colder, and even the surface of his skin was covered with crystal frost. His momentum quickly rose to the limit, and his eyes suddenly shot out a burst of cold light. Top of the Buddha. Whoosh! The giant arms that were tightly connected to each other suddenly poured out in torrents. It was Hashirama, who was controlling the body of the giant Buddha, and when he got closer, he realized that this Hashirama was much bigger than Dustless's ultimate body Kinsusanu. Chapter 142. The great Buddha attacked with all his strength, and his fists were exceptionally ferocious, and Susanoo was forced to retreat again and again. The tyrannical strength made Susanoo constantly forced to retreat, and Dustless on top of his head was also trembling. Kacha, looking up, Kinsusanoo's left shoulder was broken by brute force, exposed to the erosion of the air. The uneven wounds looked like they were bitten by a fierce beast, very hideous. If this hits a person, Dustless took a deep breath, his eyes widened, and the horror was not hidden at all. Looking at the huge fist on Kinsusanoo's shoulder, he couldn't help but feel a chill. If this hit a person, I'm afraid anyone would die. It seems that Kinsusanoo can't do anything to him. Sighing, Dustless's ultimate form Kinsusanoo was strong, but compared with the giant Buddha opposite, it was like a small child in front of a big one. There was no comparison at all. The Kyubi with Kinsusanoo was not as strong as the giant Buddha, not to mention that Dustless is now a pure Kinsusanoo, and there is no Kyubi. You have successfully angered me, Senja Hashirama. Lowering his head, Dustless looked at Hashirama with a gloomy face, and his eyes were full of murderous intent. People who anger me don't have a good end. The Tensigen in his right eye suddenly rippled. Dustless removed the ultimate form Kinsusanoo covering his body, and a brilliant golden light flashed in his hand, full of the feeling of invincibility. I have already seen your dismembered body. As his voice fell, the golden light in his hand became even more resplendent. His cold and lonely face was filled with a ferocious look. The smell of blood drifting in the air was dense and pungent. The golden light extended without limit, turning into an endless beam of light that swept over. Golden Will Reincarnation Explosion. Whoosh! A sharp piercing sound rang out. Raising his head, he saw a slender golden ray of light wreaking havoc like a hurricane. It was impossible to calculate how long the ray of light was. Bastard, there's no way to hide in such a large area. Staring at the golden light coming from the side, Hashirama snorted. His face was extremely ugly. Dustless's Kinsusanoo wasn't good at moving, and his technique was the same. He couldn't avoid it. The larger a creature was, the harder it was for them to move as nimbly as humans. Their body size was a disadvantage to them. Of course, there were no absolutes in this world, and there was no lack of special existences. Pucci. At a glance, the golden light pierced through the Buddha's body. The huge Buddha statue was penetrated by the golden light. In the center, one could clearly see the crack that split the statue into two. What a terrifying technique. Seeing this scene, Hashirama's face was even more serious. A technique that could defeat the most powerful technique of Mokuton, and it was so easy to defeat it. This is the complete Rinnegan Sharingan. Suddenly, Dustless smiled coldly as he felt the superpower of the Rinnegan Sharingan. The ninjutsu that was born in his eyes was similar to Uchiha Madara's. Chapter 145. In the Rain Village, the rain was hazy, the sky was hazy, and it was always so dark. The people passing through the streets were also like walking corpses, listless and hunched, as if they were possessed, like demons in human skin. Time flew by like a white steed. Unknowingly, a few years had passed. During this period, a lot of major events happened. The 4 major ninja villages of the 5 major countries were all unlucky. They were attacked by Dustless. Not to mention the fact that corpses were everywhere, they were even attacked by many small countries. However, a major country is a major country, and those small countries that took advantage of the situation were quickly razed to the ground. Several years have passed, and the 4 great ninja villages quickly came out of the initial haze, especially Konoha village of the Land of Fire. Konoha, with its superior geographical location, large population, and rich resources, was the first to recover and maintain its position as the largest ninja village. Of the 5 villages, only the Mist was spared, and it should have firmly occupied the throne of the strongest village. After all, the Mist was the one that was not attacked, but in reality, it was not the case. The fate of the Mist was actually more miserable. Rin's death was undoubtedly a blow to Obito. Although all the ninjas were killed, except for Dustless, Obito couldn't completely let it go. Because Rin's death was indirectly related to the Mist. If the Mist didn't inject the Sanbai into Rin's body, this tragedy wouldn't have happened. Therefore, after Wuchen and Obito attacked Konoha, Uchiha Obito lurked in the Mist Village and used his powerful Sharingan to control the 4th Hokage, Yagura, and started a bloody massacre. Many ninjas with Kekkei Genkai were killed by Obito's Yagura. Some time ago, Uchiha Obito bewitched Gonpei Kisame and tricked him into joining the Akatsuki. What's the situation in Konoha? In the brightly lit secret room, Dustless quietly looked at the world in the rain, and after a moment of silence, he couldn't help but ask. His tone was very different from the past, and it had a little bit of magnetism. After a few years of living like a prince, Wuchen no longer had that awe-inspiring and sharp aura from before. His aura was completely restrained, and there was a little more gentleness. Dustless was nearly 20 years old, and compared to his ignorant self, he was now a lot more mature. Since Dustless Sama attacked Konoha a few years ago, there was no suitable person to be the Hokage, and the 3rd had to come back and continue to be the Hokage. Recalling the situation of Konoha in recent years, White Zetsu reported seriously, and after that, he silently looked at Dustless's back. In recent years, Dustless has hardly taken a step out of the Rain Village, and has been cultivating in the Mist Village, so there was no way to know what he was doing. Hearing this, Dustless nodded, and his expression was the same as usual. After several years of silence, he was accustomed to not showing his emotions, and after a moment of thinking, he asked, "What's the situation of the Uchiha clan? They should be having a very difficult time now." Indeed. Black Zetsu nodded slightly. The situation of the Uchiha clan was indeed not optimistic, and even the 3rd Hokage, who was known as a good person, didn't care about the Uchiha clan. After all, Obito and Dustless, who destroyed Konoha, were both members of the Uchiha clan. Even if they had nothing to do with the Uchiha clan, in the end, they were still members of the Uchiha clan, and it was inevitable that Konoha's higher-ups would feel estranged and disgusted with the Uchiha clan. This is especially true for Shimura Danzo, who is always clamoring to destroy the Uchiha clan to avenge himself and wash away his humiliation. However, according to Dust's guess, this old guy is probably confused by his powerful dojutsu, so he wants to obtain the Sharingan by any means necessary. What a tragic clan. Shaking his head and sighing softly, Dustless didn't feel guilty. Anyway, the Uchiha and Konoha's higher-ups didn't like each other, especially Dustless, who knew Fugaku very well. He was the kind of person who was ambitious, and it was impossible for him to give up resistance and watch the Uchiha clan being mercilessly slaughtered. Has Obito been in contact with Itachi recently, Zetsu? After a moment of silence, Dustless asked again. If he guessed correctly, Obito has been in contact with Uchiha Itachi, hoping that Itachi would join the Akatsuki. Yes, Dustless-sama, but Itachi didn't seem to be in a hurry to agree. White Zetsu nodded first, and then said in confusion. Leave it to Obito. Dustless shook his head, and then his body disappeared strangely, as if he had drilled into the void. There was no breath, and it was impossible to capture him. And a voice sounded, as if it came from the space and time, and the tone and voice sounded like Dustless. Have you found the trace of the Ichibi? Don't tell me he's really dead. The Ichibi is not dead, he's alive, and he's still in the Sand Village. Black Zetsu said with a hoarse voice. In these years, the only thing that Dustless cared about was the trace of the Ichibi, and fortunately, the Ichibi was still alive. That's good. The voice in the void was relieved. Dustless was really afraid that the Ichibi was really dead, and then the situation would become very complicated, and even the Eye of the Moon plan would have to be aborted. After so many years, Dustless-sama's strength has become more and more unpredictable. After a while, White Zetsu, who recovered, sighed. Dustless was so mysterious these years, he came and went without a trace. Unless Dustless specifically came to find you, there was no way to know where Dustless was. Indeed. Chapter 146. Staring at the hideous and decaying body of the Geto Mazo, Dustless couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Who would have thought that such a withered tree, which was already dead, contained a majestic vitality, even more than the vitality contained in Senja Hashirama's Mokuton. When things reach an extreme, they will move in the opposite direction, it's really true. Glancing at the Geto Mazo casually, Dustless said in an indifferent tone, his dark pupils always remained calm. After so many years, Dustless has developed an unchanging attitude in the face of anything. Yes, who would have thought that such a monster would be the shell of the Jubi? The silver-haired beauty appeared, and her dark watery eyes stopped on Dustless's body, and immediately moved over. Her calm eyes rippled. Who else could it be but Otsutsuki Hagoromo? Otsutsuki Haruo's slender silver hair rippled with an elegant fragrance. She wore light makeup and a plain dress. Her skin was smooth and fair, and she was still as coquettish and charming as before. Her smile and frown could turn the world upside down. Her breath smelled like orchids, and her thin pink lips were particularly attractive. Her eyes were narrowed into crescents, and there were charming and lovely dimples on her delicate face. She looked at Wuchen with a smile, and she was particularly lovely and charming. Dustless's face changed slightly. He looked at Otsutsuki Hagoromo speechlessly, and then looked at the latter staring at him with a teasing face. He took back the words that were about to come out of his mouth, closed his eyes, and ignored her directly. There was no need to look for trouble. Lecherous but not daring scum. Seeing Dustless closing his eyes and ignoring her, Otsutsuki Hagoromo's expression suddenly stiffened. She no longer had the coquettish posture before. She gritted her teeth and stared at Dustless, stomped her feet, and couldn't wait to kick him. Are you talking about me? Dustless looked at Otsutsuki Hagoromo with an innocent face, and he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Obviously, they have been married for a long time, and I don't know how many times I have done it with you. How dare you say that I am lecherous but not daring? Is there anyone else here besides you? Otsutsuki Haguro looked at Dustless contemptuously with a sneer on his face. He was very disdainful of Dustless playing dumb. The corner of his mouth twitched fiercely. Dustless suppressed the impulse to hit her in his heart and finally shook his head. It was impossible to reason with women, and there was no need to reason. Dustless, who knew Otsutsuki Haruo's temperament well, thought so. Looking at Otsutsuki Haruo's graceful figure, Dustless calmly retracted his gaze and was too lazy to talk nonsense. What he had to do was to teach her a lesson that night and make her speechless. It's time. Soon, the Uchiha clan will be destroyed. Dustless stared at the black coffin in front of him and felt the coldness that filled it. He chuckled softly. This fellow is most suitable to be my clone in the future. Gotcha. As soon as Wu Chen's voice fell, the ice-cold coffin cracked open with a bang, revealing a rather young figure. The corpse stood up as if it had come back to life. The corpse was extremely well preserved, and there was no sign of damage at all. His facial features were clearly visible, and he was quite handsome. He was wearing a simple black coat, and the Uchiha round fan behind him was clearly visible. The only difference was that there were countless black iron rods inserted all over the body. He will be my clone in the future. Dustless smiled slightly, and the corpse in front of him opened his eyes, revealing scarlet eyes. It was the 3-tomo Sharingan. Who is this guy, and his eye power doesn't seem to be weak? Otsutsuki Haruo looked at the corpse standing up, and her eyes flashed with surprise. She could feel that the corpse in front of her was extraordinary, especially the eye power of the Sharingan. He is Uchiha Kagami, and he has the Manjiki Sharingan. His thoughts poured into Uchiha Kagami's mind, and under Otsutsuki Haruo's surprised gaze, Uchiha Kagami's 3-tomo Sharingan suddenly connected. That pair of eyes is really a waste. Otsutsuki Haruo said with regret. It's a pity to put the Manjiki Sharingan on a dead person, especially when Dustless is controlling Uchiha Kagami. Even if he has the Manjiki Sharingan, it won't work. There's no way. Hearing this, Dustless shrugged. Uchiha Kagami's descendant, Uchiha Shisui, should also have the Manjiki Sharingan now, but if he can pledge his allegiance to him, Dustless can give him Uchiha Kagami's eyes, but this is obviously impossible. Uchiha Kagami will appear in the Akatsuki as my clone in the future, so it's better if I don't show up. The reason why Dustless has such an idea is also after careful consideration. One masked man is enough. He only needs to guide Uchiha Obito behind the scenes to implement the plan, and there is no need to appear in person. 2 masked men may be able to fish in troubled waters in a short time, but as time passes, some clever people will find flaws in it, and by then, there will be many flaws. For example, Uchiha Itachi, not to mention his strength. He is extremely shrewd and extremely sensitive, so it's only a matter of time before he finds flaws. Indeed. Otsutsuki Haruo also felt that Dustless should live in seclusion, and shouldn't do everything by himself. Rebuilding the Otsutsuki clan with Dustless is the first important task, especially since there is no movement in his stomach, which makes Otsutsuki Haruo particularly irritable, and all day long he hopes that Dustless will communicate with her more. However, Dustless naturally didn't understand Otsutsuki Haruo's thoughts. He just focused on controlling Uchiha Kagami's body, frowning slightly as he looked at the black conduits all over the body. Your technique is really clumsy, Dustless. Dustless looked at the black iron conduits all over Uchiha Kagami's body with disdain. These conduits are the foundation of controlling Uchiha Kagami's body. This is really not beautiful. Looking at the disorderly black iron conduits inserted all over the body, Dustless smiled awkwardly, and immediately controlled Uchiha Kagami's body to absorb the black iron conduits. Although she didn't know the specific purpose of Wuchen and Obito, at least they were allies now. Well, let's not worry about them for the time being. Yahiko nodded, as Conan said before, whether it was Dustless or Obito, at least they were now in the same boat. After a while, the atmosphere suddenly became silent. Both Conan and Yahiko were silent. What a rare scene. The space beside Yahiko suddenly distorted, like a spring in the deep sea, and soon, a mysterious man wearing a mask and black clothes came out of it, wearing an orange spiral mask and a thin body. It was Uchiha Obito. Don't tell me you don't even know how to deal with people? Conan's pretty face turned ugly when she saw Obito's sudden intrusion. The cold light in her eyes disappeared in a flash, and a sullen expression appeared on her face. Her delicate face was filled with coldness, like a blooming snow lotus. Obviously, she didn't like Obito very much. Oh. You're really unreasonable. We're allies now, but when that guy appeared, you didn't like him so much, Conan. Ignoring Conan's angry face, Uchiha Obito said bluntly, and the guy he was talking about was naturally Wuchen. You? Conan was startled, her pretty face was very unnatural. She looked at Obito angrily and said coldly, "He's different from you, a walking corpse." "I'm afraid you can't convince yourself with these words." Obito smiled faintly, then he looked back at Pain, who was still expressionless, and walked straight towards him. Did Uchiha Itachi agree? Without looking at Obito, Yahiko's voice was always so cold, isolated from the world, as if it came from a different space, incompatible with the world in front of him. "Not for the time being, I still need a fire." Obito was obviously used to Yahiko's tone, so he just replied faintly. Obviously, his plan to kidnap Itachi was blocked. In that case, after a moment of silence, Pain's eyes flashed with a cold light, and his whole body was filled with killing intent. Then punish him in the name of God. A mere chess piece dares to call himself a god, ridiculous. Under the mask, Obito raised the corner of his mouth, and immediately said indifferently, "That's not necessary, just let nature take its course. I believe that Konoha's higher-ups will soon make a move on the Uchiha." Little did they know that the content of the conversation between Uchiha Obito and Tendo Yahiko fell into the ears of dust in the distance. "Let nature take its course, ridiculous, I only believe in changing fate. Then let me design a script for you in advance, my stupid brother Uchiha Itachi." Chapter 148. A black shadow shuttled through the dense forest at an extremely fast speed, and it was impossible to capture its movement trajectory. Its speed was completely beyond the range of human vision. "That kid hasn't opened his Manjiki Sharingan yet." The figure shuttling through the dense forest was Uchiha Kagami, and his speed was extremely fast. As the controller, Dustless was naturally still far away in the Rain Village, using his powerful eyes to control Kagami's movements. "I didn't expect that kid Itachi hasn't opened his Manjiki Sharingan." In other words, Uchiha Shursui is still alive. Dustless, who was far away in the Rain Village, was thinking calmly. Suddenly, a bright light flashed in his heart, and his eyes suddenly opened, flashing with a burning light. After thinking for a while, a huge plan suddenly took shape in his heart. "In that case, let me help you open your Manjiki Sharingan." Dustless's mouth curled into a cold smile. The way to open his Manjiki Sharingan is extremely simple and straightforward. As long as Itachi sees his loved ones, die in front of him, he will open his Manjiki Sharingan. Now, Itachi has 3 Tomo Sharingan. In other words, as long as his loved ones die in front of him, he will open his Manjiki Sharingan. "Konoha, it's been a long time." The huge village in front of him came into view, and Dustless smiled through Kagami's vision. He had to sigh that Konoha's ninjas were the most resilient. In just a few years, Konoha came back from the dead, and was even more prosperous and powerful than before. However, perhaps because of the previous sneak attack by Wuchen and Obito, Konoha was particularly vigilant about the surrounding environment. There were 3 layers inside and 3 layers outside. The layers of security were very strict, and there were many large defensive enchantments. However, these barriers were a simple matter for Dustless, and he easily invaded the interior of Konoha and rushed to the Uchiha's base at full speed. A large number of clansmen gathered at the Naka shrine of the Uchiha clan. Many members of the Uchiha clan looked cautious and nervous. Most of the people here were the elite ninjas of the Uchiha clan. Naturally, they were on the side of the Uchiha clan. Of course, there were some special existences among them. The young man, who looked quite similar to Uchiha Kagami, intentionally or unintentionally glanced at Fugaku, who was sitting on the main seat. Sometimes, he looked around at the angry members of the Uchiha clan, and his shining eyes dimmed. These fools only think about fighting for power and profit all day long. The young man was Uchiha Shursui. Due to the fact that Dustless had taught Shursui before, he also made a lot of contributions during the 3rd Shinobi World Conference. That's how he got the title, Instant Body, Shursui. To some extent, it was Dustless who created Shursui. Seeing this scene, the people in the Rain Village suddenly sneered, and their pupils suddenly burst out with horror. Shursui, who was controlled by Dustless, suddenly burst out with strong killing intent. His Sharingan also changed, suddenly turning into a purple Rinnegan. Chapter 149. There is no doubt that Uchiha Shisui is a righteous person. His vision and heart are beyond the narrow clan doctrine, which is rare in the world of shinobi. This is very similar to his father, Uchiha Kagami. In the depths of the dark forest, Dustless controlled Kagami to flash like a ghost, shuttling through the dense forest, controlling the weight of his body to an unparalleled degree. Even if his body fell on a branch as thin as a willow branch, he could jump up and quickly chase after the two figures in front of him. Uchiha Shisui. The kid from back then can already stand on his own, Dustless suddenly remembered when he was still in Konoha. At that time, Uchiha Shisui was just a little kid. Now, after a few years, not only has he successfully awakened the Manjiki Sharingan, but his strength is also quite good. This really made Dustless sigh at the impermanence of the world. But those who stop me will die. Dustless's mouth was cold, and his whole body was overflowing with cold air. If Shisui really uses Kodo Amatsukami to change Fugaku's mind, then the whole plan will be completely destroyed. His speed is quite good, worthy of the body flicker Shisui. Seeing Shisui's speed as fast as lightning, almost instantly catching up with Fugaku, Dustless smiled slightly. He taught Shisui a lot about the body flicker technique. Shisui? Looking at Uchiha Shisui who suddenly appeared in front of him, Fugaku frowned slightly, then he relaxed and showed a kind smile as he said with a light chuckle, "I was wondering who it was, what's the matter?" Uchiha Fugaku smiled calmly, giving the feeling of a cool breeze, without the slightest hint of a schemer, which made Shisui hesitate for a while. Fugaku has always been good to him, even better than his son, Itachi. If he mercilessly uses Kodo Amatsukami to change Fugaku's mind, then he really can't do it. Patriarch, please take back your order. The Uchiha should coexist peacefully with Konoha. Clenching his teeth, the hesitation in Shisui's eyes was replaced by determination as he looked at Fugaku and said firmly, "The Uchiha clan is digging its own grave." Shisui's cold and indifferent voice undoubtedly showed his position. Hearing this, the gentle smile on Fugaku's face suddenly stiffened, and he looked at Shisui with uncertainty. This kid has the Manjiki Sharingan and can be said to be the current combat power of the Uchiha clan. If Fugaku is not optimistic about the future of the Uchiha clan, then maybe the Uchiha clan will be completely destroyed. Foolish, Shisui. Fugaku scolded coldly. Since the incident a few years ago, the higher-ups of Konoha have been treating us coldly, and they can't wait to get rid of us as soon as possible. Haven't you seen the situation of the Uchiha clan over the years? Fugaku sneered, also, even if I really give up this plan, do you think that the higher-ups of Konoha will let the Uchiha clan go? I'm sorry to tell you that this is impossible. Although Fugaku's words were a bit fierce, what he said was indeed an undeniable fact. Even if the Uchiha clan is really sincere in serving Konoha, with the existence of a character like Shimura Danzo, the Uchiha clan won't be safe and sound. Patriarch, you only need to answer my question, whether you will give up this rebellion or not, and I will naturally solve other problems. Shisui looked at Fugaku with a blank expression, and the Sharingan in his eyes was spinning rapidly. As long as Fugaku refuses his proposal, Shisui will not hesitate to use Kodo Amatsukami to change Fugaku's mind. I'm sorry, but I won't accept your conditions even if I'm torn to pieces. As long as we resist Konoha, it will be a shortcut for the Uchiha clan. Fugaku's eyes were filled with wisdom, and at the same time, his three-tomo Sharingan began to spin. He knew that the next battle would be hard. Several guards also surrounded Fugaku and stared at Shisui. Shisui's instant body flicker is not a joke, and perhaps in just a moment, their heads will fall to the ground. In that case, under the horrified gaze of Fugaku and the others, Shisui's Mangekyo flashed and stared at Fugaku's sluggish eyes, and the Mangekyo emitted a strong fluctuation of eye power. Kodo Amatsukami. Not good. Feeling the horrifying eye power of Shisui, Fugaku's face changed dramatically, and his whole body became cold, and a huge spiritual force invaded his mind, causing him to faint instantly. Boom! However, at this moment, a strange black figure shuttled, and it was extremely fast, and it easily kicked Obito, and the huge force kicked Shisui dozens of feet away. One step too late. Looking at Fugaku on the ground, Kagami frowned, and Dustless's face became gloomy. For the sake of our old friendship, I wanted to let you go, but it seems that I have to take your eyes to change Fugaku's will. Thinking of this, Dustless controlled Kagami's eyes to jump with a cold light, and the only way to change Fugaku's will is to use Kodo Amatsukami or Izanami. However, the price of using Izanami is too great, and it's definitely not something Dustless can afford. Although Dustless can control Kagami's eyes, as long as he takes Shisue's eyes, he can change Fugaku's will again. Who the hell are you? Shisue's face was ugly as he looked at the man in black with a very familiar feeling. Hearing this, the corner of Dustless's mouth curled into a playful smile, then he turned his head, revealing half of his face, looking at Shisui with a cold expression. My stupid son, don't you even recognize your own father? Chapter 151. Mahaharoya. Kagami's left eye suddenly stared at Shisui inside Kinsusuno, and the Sharingan in his left eye rippled, and the 9 tomo hanging on the black lines trembled slightly. What kind of jutsu is this? Uchiha Shisui, who was in the mature Susanoo, looked at Uchiha Kagami as if he was facing a great enemy. Especially when he saw the purple eyes with the 9 tomo, he had a bad feeling in his heart that he had never felt before. It was like being stared at by a prehistoric beast. It's definitely not an ordinary jutsu, it must be, boom. Boom. Shisui's voice inside the Susanoo hasn't fallen yet, when a strong repulsive force came head-on, and an unprecedented heavy blow directly swallowed the Susanoo. The seemingly mighty Kinsusanoo was instantly torn apart. Puff! Blood splashed in midair, and looking up, it was Shisui who was hit by the repulsive force. His whole body was covered in blood, and his clothes were all stained with blood. He didn't seem to have the strength to fight anymore, but some people can't be judged by common sense. Even so, Shisui still struggled to stand up. Are your eyes the legendary Rinnegan? Looking at Kagami's left eye, Shisui's eyes were filled with understanding. A long time ago, there were legends of the 3 great dojutsu in the ninja world. Yes, you know the Rinnegan through ninjutsu. Although the legend of the Rinnegan has been passed down since ancient times, but in the end, there are very few people who really understand it, and the difference between Dustless's Rinnegan and the ordinary Rinnegan is quite big. It's true. It's easy to recognize. Hearing this, Shisui's mouth raised a bitter smile, and said in despair, such an eye can't be the Byakugan, and naturally it can't be the Sharingan. Although there is a big difference between your eyes and the legendary Rinnegan, it still retains the shape of the Rinnegan to a large extent. That's true. Kagami nodded. Although Uchiha Shisui's statement was just an inference, it was true. If the 9 tomo were removed from the eyes, there wouldn't be much difference between the eyes and the Rinnegan. A character like you shouldn't be interested in Uchiha. I don't think he has any relationship with you. Shisui pointed at Fugaku, who had fainted, and said to Dustless with a rosy complexion on his face. Mahaharoya's frontal attack, and you can still hold on until now, not bad. Kagami nodded slightly. The essence of Mahaharoya is actually similar to Amaterasu. It releases a strong repulsive force at the focus of the pupil, and it can be positioned at will. In fact, it's not much different from Madara's will grave, border prison. However, Kagami can naturally see that Shisui has reached the end of his life. You can't say that, he's an important part of my script. Kagami replied with a faint smile, and then looked at Shisui with a cold expression. As long as I take your Sharingan, I can change his will again. Then it won't be long before the Uchiha clan is completely destroyed. Kagami's mouth raised into a gloomy smile. Shisui's previous use of Kodo Amatsukami to tamper with Fugaku's will did indeed cause him a lot of trouble. But now, as long as he takes his Sharingan, he can use Kodo Amatsukami to change Fugaku's will again. Although I don't know what your purpose is, I won't let you succeed. Shisui's eyes were full of determination, and his face was resolute. He loved Konoha, and he was willing to sacrifice his life to protect the Uchiha clan. A sad ant crushed by the wheel of fate, you can't change the outcome of the Uchiha clan's destruction. Looking at Uchiha Shirsue's determined face with disdain, Mirror's face was full of sarcasm. Now, Shirsue's body was full of gold and jade, almost all of his internal organs were shattered by the Mahabharata, and it won't be long before he dies. I know, you want nothing more than to take my Sharingan, to reactivate Kodo Amatsukami, and change Fugaku's will again. Uchiha Shirsue smiled faintly. He could see through this point, and immediately his face became gloomy. Then, this is the only way to protect Uchiha and the village. Pucci. Under Kagami's surprised gaze, Shirsue didn't show the slightest mercy, and his fingers hooked, and without hesitation, he dug out his Mangekyo. Boom! Shirsue's right hand suddenly burst, and the two soft eyeballs exploded into blood mist. Shirsue looked at the scene in front of him in a daze. Everything happened so fast that he almost couldn't react. When he came back to his senses, Shirsue's Mangekyo Sharingan had already turned into a bloody mist. Your personality hasn't changed, Shirsue. After a long silence, Kagami sighed and looked at Shirsue with a complicated expression. Looking at the shattered Mangekyo Sharingan, Kagami didn't hate Shirsue, because this wasn't his fault, and it was this deformed era that caused his tragedy. Uchiha Shirsue's greatness was beyond doubt. He was willing to sacrifice everything for the sake of the village, even if it was his own life. Even if Shimura Danzo took his eye, he still didn't feel any hatred or pain towards the village. Even before his death, he gave his other eye to Uchiha Itachi, hoping that he would protect the village. Shirsue was a man of justice, but he was also a hero of tragedy. But this didn't change my plan, Shirsue. Even without your Mangekyo Sharingan, I can still change Fugaku's will again. You're tuning into the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.